前回のインタビューでは、質量空間時間が数学的なオブジェクトとして存在していて、宇宙自体が一つのマトリックスとしてプログラマーである神によってシミュレーションされているっていうお話をしてきたと思うんですけど、このモデルが神を推定する場合に、それは科学対神の議論とどのようにつなげることができますか？
I don't like this phrase God versus science debate because it suggests that you can believe in God or believe in science but not both. Science has no place for God. Science books are full of formulas, but in none of these formulas do we find God. There's no E equals God C squared, for example. God doesn't seem to appear anywhere in our physical universe, and so there really is no debate. For us, God inhabits the world of moral choices, but science rules the physical domain. However, according to the simulation universe model, this mathematical electron, we won't find God in a science book, but for the same reason we won't find God in a motorcycle maintenance manual either. It's not God's job to push electrons around protons or pistons through cylinders. For example, let's take this black hole simulation by NASA. Okay, we see a black hole, but when we look deeper, we see the simulation is just lots of numbers, and when we look even deeper, we find a computer program. Now that computer program was written by NASA programmers, and so the programmer's source code can be considered evidence of those NASA programmers, even although they don't appear in any of the lines of that source code. And so any mathematical model that can explain the universe but refers to a source code underlying that model could be considered as evidence of a programmer. And as this programmer designed our universe simulation, then we're talking about a programmer God. Now this electron model can be used to derive aspects of physics, such as the physical constants. Science knows what is the speed of light, but they don't know why it has the value it does. Why this speed? Why not faster or slower? This model can tell us why light travels at this speed, why gravity has this value and not that value, why the electron has this mass and not that mass, and so on. And so if this model does have the potential to describe the universe, then the God programmed us approach has to be taken seriously.
もしこのモデルが神がどのようにして宇宙を作ったのかを詳細に描写できるとしたら、同時になんで神がそうしたのかについても知ることができますか？このシミュレーションの目的としてはどんなことが考えられますか？
The mathematics of this model gives no answers to this question. We may never know for reasons I will go into later. However, the story of Adam and Eve fits nicely into a matrix scenario. Perhaps we could start there. Adam and Eve were in paradise, the Garden of Eden. Essentially, this meant that resources were unlimited. Anything they want, they could just pick from a tree. There was no disease, no predators, no aging, no death, and so on. Now, we placed in a modern context, let us suppose that for whatever reason, environmental collapse, nuclear war, climate change, human life cannot be sustained as it is now. Many of our present activities, however, could be conducted in virtual reality if we had computers fast enough. Then my virtual self could take a virtual flight to a virtual tropical island where it could eat virtual foods and swim in a virtual ocean, and I could experience these things as if I was there. Let us suppose that this is possible. Our physical bodies hibernate in some kind of pod, and via a neural network we connect our minds to the virtual world. And this virtual world, like the Garden of Eden, would be a paradise. Resources, being virtual, would be unlimited. There would be no disease, and our virtual selves could not die, and our physical bodies, maintained in these hibernation pods, would require little energy, and being isolated from disease, stress, and so on, could conceivably survive for a millennium while we live in this virtual world of the mind. Okay, so now we, for example, are in this virtual paradise. Then one day, a girl, we can call her Eve, she picks up an apple, and a serpent gives her the password, and as she scrolls through it, she finds a video of the real world. She then learns that she's just a character inside a simulation. Such knowledge our virtual selves were not programmed to have. This causes the program to glitch and reboot. The program restarts, but now it copies the real world. If we continue with the Bible story, in this rebooted simulation, resources are now limited, and our virtual selves have to work for their food. There is disease, aging, and death. We work, and we die, as the saying goes. There are only two certainties in this new world.
Every bit as certain as death and taxes.
Death and taxes?
Yes.
Death and taxes?
Yes.
じゃあ私がバーチャルな世界に入っていって何らかの理由でその本当の私から離れたっていうことですか？じゃあどうしてそのバーチャルな世界にいる私たちはバグが起きたそのプログラムを直すことはできないんですか？
It may not be that simple. There could be games played out in the heavens that we're not supposed to know about. The Adam and Eve story also introduced a duality of good and evil. This duality hadn't existed prior to the apple. Good and evil, like work and death, are post-apple concepts. We do not question that work and death are very real to us, yet we measure them in society terms rather than through laboratory experiments. And so could it be that good and evil are equally as real as birth and death, as real as our mass, space, and time physical universe itself, and that good and evil form an integral part of this universe simulation? In this model, mass, space, and time can overlap, cancel, and disappear. And so inversely, we can create mass, space, and time from nothing, and in the process build a physical universe. And so if good and evil are inverse properties, they could appear under the right conditions, the analogy being matter and antimatter. And if they are real, if they're not just concepts in the human mind, then this battle between good and evil may be integral to the simulation itself. And so could it be that fundamentally it is this interplay between good and evil which has shaped the history of mankind?
善と悪が実在する実態であるっていう可能性があると今お話しされてたと思うんですけど、それは惑星や星と同じくらい実態として存在しているっていうことですか？
Once you accept that behind this universe could be a computer program, then we have to look for the motives of the programmer. What could be the purpose of the simulation? And to answer this, we have to look beyond the physical universe and analyze those emotional forces that have driven civilizations. And if there is a common link, then this could have been encoded into the program source code. This means that our physical universe is the stage. All men are players, and one man in his time plays many parts. William Shakespeare.
このモデルの中では善と悪をどう定義してますか？
First, let us define right and wrong as attributes of society. Some are cultural, some relate to the laws of that society, some are moral codes. We can then define good and evil as the prerogatives of the gods, a spiritual battle played out on earth, but perhaps the heavens also. For us, good and evil should therefore be independent of society and should be self-evident and would point to a universal truth. For if we can all conceptualize good and evil, evil is the dark force, whereas good is that to which we should aspire, then the very act of acknowledging these concepts could be considered as evidence of a universal truth that transcends society. This sounds quite straightforward, but history shows it is not. In theory, evil should be shunned, and so in order to survive, evil would have to confuse the picture, the clarity of vision between good and evil becoming fuzzy. Evil can be disguised as good. There is a saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. However, in order to win the battle, evil would have to remove the very notion of good and evil by eliminating God, for God symbolizes the forces of good, such that good and evil can then be replaced with a secular right and wrong. If we can end up with a purely secular society, a society without a God or universal truth as a guide, then whoever controls the narrative of that society, whoever controls the media, controls all. There is this famous quote.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
In the Bible, it is written that the devil offered to give Jesus control over all the kingdoms of the earth, along with the wealth of these kingdoms, implying that they were the realm of the devil. Otherwise, the devil could not make such a grandiose gesture. And so one sign of this would be moves by our ruling elites to promote a secular society, replacing God with pseudo-religions, pseudo-science, for example, where the expert is the new priesthood. Now, traditionally, the church put a brake on the power of kings, for to the people, the church represented a higher power. If there is no universal truth as a permanent reference, and no God as a higher calling, then slogans will suffice to challenge our emotions and control the narrative. Unfortunately, a secular society has no spiritual dimension, and so can only appeal to our material side. And this is a beast that must constantly be fed new victims to survive. And so we can ask, is a conflict in the heavens being played out amongst us on Earth? A war between Russia and America using nuclear weapons would end the planet. Both sides would lose. A virtual war, however, could be played out as a game of skill between two opposing teams. A chess game is one example.
神が私たちと一緒にゲームをプレイしている可能性があるか、それとも私たちもスピリチュアルな次元を持っているっていうことですか？
I suppose both. We live in a mass space-time universe. We call it a physical universe because it can be defined. But then as a result, God cannot come to Earth, for if God is a man, then God is not a woman. If God is tall, then God is not short. Wearing a red shirt means not wearing a blue shirt, and so on. A physical God can therefore be defined, and if God can be defined, then God is limited to that definition, and so is no longer God. The main religions solved this dilemma by using a middleman. Moses had the burning bush, Jesus the Holy Spirit, Muhammad the angel Gabriel. Now, the electron of this model is dimensionless, yet it can split into dimensioned entities, charge, wavelength, spin, entities that can be measured. And so it could be possible for a God to visit us as long as these same conditions are met, that the parameters that describe God must cancel each other, and so ultimately God, like the electron, is dimensionless. The devil also. I'm using these terms, God and devil, rather loosely, of course. But what sort of physical forms a God or devil could take, we don't know. But if they could enter our physical world, then equally, we might have a dimensionless component analogous to the human soul. And so we could have a foot in their world, the heavens. The differences between the physical world and the spiritual world would then blur. We traditionally think of them as separate worlds, but that may not be correct.